Every prison cell has echoes, every police report a missing line, every victim a voice that refuses to be forgotten. These are not just tales of crime and punishment, they are fragments of lives, choices, and the secrets that society tried to bury. Subscribe now and join us as we reopen the files, retrace the evidence, and uncover the stories they never wanted you to hear. If you think you've heard it all, this story will change your mind. The summer of 1985 burned hot over Birmingham, Alabama. Nights were heavy with the hum of crickets and the distant wail of police sirens that never stopped long enough for anyone to feel safe. In the early hours of July 2nd, a convenience store clerk was found dead behind the counter. 2 bullets in his chest, register open, no witnesses. Within 2 weeks, another clerk from a different store was shot the same way. 2 men gone, 2 families shattered, and a frightened city demanding justice. Pressure rolled down fast, from the mayor, from the headlines, from a community desperate for answers. And when detectives couldn't find the killer, they did what so many had done before in the Deep South. They found someone who fit. His name was Anthony Ray Hinton, a 29-year-old black man who lived with his mother on the west side of town. He worked nights at a warehouse, had never been in trouble with the law, and spent most of his free time fixing radios and watching baseball. He had no motive, no connection to the victims, and no reason to kill. But he had something else. A face the system could point to. One night, police cars screeched into his yard. Flashlights cut through the dark. Hinton stepped out with his hands raised, confused, shirtless in the humid air. "What's going on?" he asked. The answer came in cold metal cuffs. "You're under arrest for murder." The next morning, his world turned into a cage. Interrogators told him he was facing the death penalty. They claimed his mother's old .38 revolver matched the bullets used in both killings. They said the evidence was airtight. Hinton laughed, not out of disrespect, but disbelief. "That gun hasn't been fired in 20 years, he told them. "You've got the wrong man." But his words didn't matter. The bullets didn't match, not really. But this Tate's ballistics expert said they did, and that was enough. Then came the voice that still echoes in his memory. One of the detectives leaned in close, looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You're going to jail, son. You know why? Because you're black, and a jury's going to see that too." Those words weren't evidence, they were prophecy. Hinton's public defender visited him once before trial. He told him the county wouldn't pay for a qualified ballistics expert, so they hired the cheapest one they could find. The man was blind in one eye. The defense barely argued. The prosecutor painted Hinton as a nighttime predator with a quiet voice and a killer's patience. The jury, 11 white jurors, 1 black, took less than 2 hours to decide his fate. The verdict came in with the weight of generations. Guilty. Death. Hinton didn't cry. He just stared ahead, heart numb, as guards shackled his hands and led him toward the van waiting outside the courthouse. He could hear his mother's voice faintly calling his name. Death row at Holman Prison was a world of silence and echoes. A place where every sound, from a cell door slamming to the slow footsteps of the warden, meant something final. Inmates whispered prayers through the bars. The fluorescent lights buzzed all night. The air smelled like sweat and bleach. Hinton's cell was 5 feet wide, 8 feet long. From his window, he could see the prison yard, and beyond that, the concrete block where they housed the electric chair, a grey shadow waiting. He told himself he wouldn't lose faith, but days became years, and years turned into decades. His appeals failed one after another. Each time he was told the evidence was reliable. Each time, he watched another man walk down the corridor toward the room no one returned from. Still, Hinton survived on hope, the kind that hurts. He read the Bible. He kept a list of every sunrise he saw from his window, 10,000 of them over 30 years. Then one morning, everything changed. His attorney told him a lawyer named Bryan Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative taken an interest in his case. Stevenson had freed other men from wrongful convictions before. Men like Walter McMillian, men the system wanted to forget. When Stevenson visited, he brought new experts, real ones, who tested the gun again. They found what Hinton had said all along. No match, no link, no evidence connecting him to the murders. The results were clear, scientific, undeniable. But the state of Alabama refused to admit it. As the appeal moved forward, Hinton sat on his bunk that night, staring out his window at the electric chair. He could hear the hum of the lights in the hallway and the faint crackle of thunder outside. For 30 years, he had waited for someone to believe him. Now, for the first time, he felt something shift. Not freedom, not yet, but a storm gathering on his side. What he didn't know was that the truth he'd carried for 3 decades was about to collide with the very system that condemned him. And when it did, it wouldn't just test his faith. It would expose a wound at the heart of American justice. The years on death row were measured not by time, but by sound. The clang of doors, the shuffle of guards, the final footsteps of men walking toward the chair. Anthony Ray Hinton learned their rhythm. Each time the echo faded, silence took its place like an old friend who never stayed long. He had no clock, no sunlight, and no sense of what freedom felt like anymore. The cell was 5 feet by 8. Concrete walls, a thin mattress, a metal toilet. But the worst part wasn't the space. It was knowing the world had already buried him alive. In the next cell, his neighbor Henry used to hum gospel songs. "You keep your soul clean, Ray," he'd say through the bars. "They can lock your body, but not your faith." Henry was executed in 1999. After that, the humming stopped. Hinton began to read everything he could. History, philosophy, even romance novels. Anything that didn't end in death. He imagined food he would never eat again. He built a baseball team in his mind, each player a memory from before the arrest. He laughed, cried, prayed, and made friends with men society had forgotten. Some nights, he'd stare through the narrow slit of his window and talk to the moon. "You've seen it all," he'd whisper. "You saw me free, and you see me now." Outside those walls, the Equal Justice Initiative was fighting for him, but the fight was slow. The state of Alabama refused to retest the bullets. Appeals were denied again and again. Judges signed their rejections with the same mechanical tone. Conviction stands. Sentence affirmed. In 2002, nearly 20 years after his arrest, new forensic technology had already cleared dozens of men around the country, but not him. Every request for new testing was blocked. Officials said the evidence was conclusive. The same evidence that had been tested by a blind man and accepted by a jury that had never wanted to see. Hinton started writing. Letters to God. Not prayers. Letters. "If I ever get out," he wrote once, "I'll tell them the truth about this place. I'll tell them about the smell of bleach, the sound of keys, the way fear gets quiet after a while." Then, one morning, a guard came by with an envelope marked Equal Justice Initiative. Inside was a handwritten note from Bryan Stevenson. It said, "We're still here. Don't give up." For the first time in years, Hinton smiled. In 2014, the US Supreme Court finally agreed to hear his case. Stevenson argued that the ballistics evidence used to convict Hinton was invalid, that the state's so-called expert had been unqualified, and that every test result tying the bullets to Hinton's gun was false. The justices reviewed the record. They saw the lack of proof, the broken system, the years wasted. And after 3 decades of silence, Anthony Ray Hinton's name was finally spoken where it mattered most. On April 1st, 2015, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously, 9-0, that Hinton's conviction could not stand. Back in Holman Prison, Hinton heard the news through a static radio. He didn't cheer. He just sat down on his bed and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, not to the court, Not even to Bryan, but to God. 2 weeks later, guards unlocked his cell. The sound that had haunted him for 30 years now became a doorway. He stepped into the hallway, blinking against the sunlight he hadn't seen since his 20s. The other inmates clapped and cheered. Some cried. When the gates opened, Hinton walked out into the Alabama air, older, thinner, and carrying nothing but a plastic bag of letters and his mother's photograph. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. He didn't answer any of them. He just looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'm free." But freedom wasn't simple. The state that stole 30 years of his life never said sorry. There was no apology, no compensation, only silence, as if justice had balanced the scale by accident. He told the reporters later, "They took the best years of my life, but I forgive them, because forgiveness is the only cell they can't keep me in." And when he said it, even the cameras went quiet. Freedom came with ghosts. Every sound reminded Hinton of prison. The slam of a car door, the hum of a ceiling fan, even the ticking of a clock. He hadn't heard a clock in 30 years. Now it wouldn't stop. He struggled to sleep on soft beds, to sit in restaurants, to make eye contact with strangers. The world had moved on without him. Cell phones, the internet, everything glowing and fast. He still carried a rotary phone number in his pocket. Bryan Stevenson stayed by his side, helping him rebuild life piece by piece. "You don't owe the world anything," he told him. "Just live." But Hinton wanted more than to live. He wanted to speak. He began visiting churches, schools, and prisons, telling his story not with anger, but with faith. He told them about the night air on death row, about hope that survived even when it had no reason to. He spoke of forgiveness, not to absolve the system, but to save himself from it. "Hate won't free you," he'd say. "Only love will." In 2018, he wrote a book, The Sun Does Shine. It became a bestseller, not because it was sensational, but because it was true. People who read it saw not a man who had suffered, but one who had refused to surrender his soul. When asked how he kept his sanity, he said, "I laughed every day because they couldn't take that from me." Anthony Ray Hinton now works alongside the Equal Justice Initiative, helping free others trapped in the same broken system. Each time someone walks out of prison after years of wrongful conviction, he stands there waiting. The man who knows what that first breath of freedom feels like. The same sun that once rose over his prison window now follows him wherever he goes. And though he lost half his life, he found something greater. Proof that mercy is stronger than hate, and truth, no matter how long it takes, will rise again. He once said, "They could lock up my body, but they couldn't lock up my joy." That joy became his revenge, his victory, his freedom. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.